The first snow of winter fell early that year, dusting the Wyoming territory with a thin blanket of white that promised harder times ahead. Cinder Hollow wasn't much to speak of, just a handful of weather-beaten buildings huddled together against the endless prairie, as if seeking comfort from each other against the harsh winds that swept down from the mountains. Elias Hart guided his horse along the main street, if you could call the rutted dirt track a street. The bay mare's breath clouded in the cold morning air as they passed the general store, where old Samuel was already sweeping his porch despite the futility of it. Snow would cover those boards again before noon. "Morning, Hart," Samuel called out, pausing in his work. Elias touched the brim of his hat in response, but didn't stop. He'd learned long ago that in a town this small, stopping to chat meant getting caught up in everyone else's business, and he had precious little patience for that. Let others gossip over their coffee and biscuits. He had fences to mend before the real winter set in. The livery stable sat at the edge of town, and beyond that, nothing but prairie and sky. Elias was just about to turn his horse toward home when he saw her. She sat on the bench outside the stage depot, still as a statue carved from sorrow itself. Her dress, a faded blue thing that had seen better days, was torn at the shoulder, and even from a distance, Elias could see the dark bruise spreading across her left cheek like spilled ink. A battered valise rested at her feet, and her hands were folded protectively over her middle in a way that told its own story. Elias had seen plenty of mail-order brides come through Cinder Hollow. They arrived on the stage with hope in their eyes and letters from prospective husbands clutched in their hands. Some found happiness, many found disappointment, a few found worse. This one had clearly found worse. He should ride on. Whatever had happened to her wasn't his concern. He had his own ghosts to wrestle with, his own empty house to return to. But something about the way she sat there, not crying, not pleading for help, just existing in her misery with a kind of dignified resignation, made him pull up his horse. "Ma'am," he said, keeping his voice neutral, "stage won't be back through for 3 days." She looked up at him then, and Elias felt something twist in his chest. Her eyes were the color of spring sage, green-gray and full of a weariness that went bone deep. She was young, couldn't be more than 23 or 24, but those eyes belonged to someone who'd already lived too much life. "I know," she said simply. Her voice had a slight accent he couldn't place, Eastern maybe, but softened by something else. "I'm not waiting for the stage." "Hotel's back that way," he offered, jerking his thumb toward town. A bitter smile touched her split lip. "The hotel requires payment in advance. I find myself temporarily without funds." Temporarily? Elias almost snorted at that. Nothing about her situation looked temporary. The bruise on her face was fresh, but he'd bet his best saddle there were older ones hidden beneath that worn dress. Whoever had done this to her and left her here with nothing wasn't likely to have a change of heart. "You got people to wire family back east?" She shook her head slowly. "No one who would answer." The wind picked up, sending a fresh scatter of snow across the depot platform. The woman shivered, pulling her thin shawl tighter. It was a delicate thing, meant for drawing rooms and tea parties, not Wyoming winters. Elias knew he should leave. Knew it as surely as he knew the sun would rise tomorrow. Getting involved in other people's troubles was a fool's game, and he'd played the fool enough for one lifetime. But his mouth opened anyway, the words coming out before he could stop them. "I got a place about 3 miles north. Nothing fancy, but it's got 4 walls and a roof. You could wait out the weather there until you figure what to do next." Her eyes widened slightly, then narrowed with suspicion. "And what would you want in return for this kindness?" "Nothing," Elias said, and meant it. "Just figure nobody ought to freeze when there's a perfectly good fire going to waste." She studied him for a long moment, taking in his weathered face, his worn but clean clothes, the way he sat his horse like he'd been born to it. Whatever she saw there must have satisfied her. Or maybe she was just desperate enough not to care. "My name is Mara," she said finally. "Mara June." Elias Hart. He dismounted and picked up her valise. Surprised by how light it was, whatever life she'd brought west with her, it didn't amount to much. "You hurt bad, can you ride?" She stood carefully, one hand still pressed to her middle. "I can manage." Elias helped her mount behind him, noting how she winced at the movement but bit back any sound of pain. Tough. Then, she'd need to be. As they rode out of town, he caught Samuel watching from his store window. By evening, everyone in Cinder Hollow would know that the hermit Elias Hart had taken in a woman. By morning, they'd have invented a dozen stories about why. Let them talk. Elias had learned to live with worse than gossip. The ride to his cabin was silent, except for the crunch of snow under hooves and the whisper of wind through the pines. Mara held on lightly, maintaining as much distance as possible while sharing a saddle. Professional? Almost. Like she'd learned to protect herself even from kindness. The cabin appeared through the trees like something from a fairy tale, if fairy tales included rough-hewn logs, a stone chimney trailing smoke, and a barn that listed slightly to the left. But it was solid and warm, and that was what mattered. "It's not much," Elias said as he helped her down. "It's more than I had an hour ago," Mara replied quietly. Inside, the cabin was sparse but clean. A main room with a fireplace, a table and 2 chairs, a kitchen area along one wall, a ladder led up to a loft, and a door opened onto what must be a bedroom. Bachelor quarters. Clearly, but well kept. Elias busied himself adding wood to the fire while Mara stood uncertainly near the door, still clutching her valise. "Oh, you can put that down," he said without looking at her. "I'll fix some coffee, then see about something to eat. Wash basin's over there if you want to clean up." He heard her move, heard the soft splash of water, when he finally turned around. She'd washed the blood from her lip and tried to arrange her hair to hide the worst of the bruise. It didn't help much, but he appreciated the effort. Pride was sometimes all a person had left. "Thank you," she said, and he knew she meant for more than just the coffee he was brewing. "No need for thanks, just being neighborly." "Is that what you call it?" A ghost of humor flickered in her eyes. "Where I come from, neighbors live a bit closer than 3 miles apart." "Welcome to Wyoming territory," Elias said dryly. "We like our space." He set a cup of coffee in front of her, noting how her hands shook slightly as she wrapped them around the warm ceramic. Now that he had her here, he wasn't sure what to do next. He'd acted on impulse, something he rarely did anymore, and now they were both stuck with the consequences. "I suppose you're wondering," she began, but he cut her off with a raised hand. "Your business is your own. You need a place to stay until you sort things out. I've got room. That's all there is to it." She looked at him with those sage green eyes, and he had the uncomfortable feeling she could see right through him. People aren't usually kind without wanting something. "Maybe you've just been meeting the wrong people." "Maybe I have," she agreed softly. The silence stretched between them. Not entirely comfortable, but not hostile either. Just 2 damaged people trying to figure out how to exist in the same space without causing more harm. "I was to be married," Mara said suddenly, as if the words had been pulled from her. "Answered an advertisement. Came all the way from Philadelphia. He seemed..." His letters were kind. Elias poured himself coffee and sat across from her. He didn't prompt her to continue, but he didn't shut her down either. Sometimes people needed to tell their story, even to strangers, especially to strangers. "Thomas Gray," she said, and her voice went flat. "He met me at the stage, took me to the hotel, said we'd marry in the morning." She touched her bruised cheek, absently. "He changed his mind when he discovered that I'd been married before, widowed, and that I was..." She stopped, her hand moving protectively to her middle again. Elias's eyes followed the gesture, understanding dawning. "He took what money I had left," she continued. "Said it was payment for his disappointment, for the cost of bringing damaged goods west." "He's a fool," Elias said quietly. And worse than a fool. Perhaps, but he's a fool with friends, and I'm a stranger with nothing. She met his eyes squarely. I won't go back to him, if that's what you're thinking. I've made that mistake before, believing men can change. They don't. They just get better at hiding what they are. Elias thought of his own past, of promises made and broken, of love turned to ash. No, he agreed. People don't change much, but that doesn't mean they're all the same. Why are you helping me? She asked. The truth now? Not that story about being neighborly. He considered the question, staring into his coffee as if it might hold answers. Why had he stopped? Why had he offered? Because I know what it's like, he said finally. To be alone and have nowhere to turn. Because once, someone helped me when they didn't have to. And because... He paused, then met her eyes. Because you didn't ask for help. Just sat there ready to face whatever came next. That takes a kind of courage I respect. Mara absorbed this in silence. Then she nodded, as if they'd reached some sort of agreement. I can work, she said. Cook, clean, mend. I won't be a burden. Didn't ask you to be anything but yourself. Elias replied, Rest for now. We'll figure out the rest later. As if his permission had released something in her. Mara's shoulders sagged with exhaustion. The adrenaline that had kept her upright was fading, leaving behind a bone-deep weariness. Bedrooms through there, Elias said, nodding toward the door. I'll bunk in the loft. I couldn't. You could and you will. Lock the door if it makes you feel safer. I'll be out checking the stock. He left before she could protest further, escaping into the cold clarity of the afternoon. The snow had stopped, but more was coming. He could smell it on the wind, feel it in the ache of his bones. As he went through the familiar routine of feeding horses and checking fences, Elias wondered what he'd gotten himself into. Mara June was trouble not because of anything she'd done, but because of what she represented. Complications, entanglements, all the things he'd sworn off after burying his wife. But when he returned to the cabin as dusk painted the sky purple and gold, and saw the warm light spilling from windows that had been dark too long, something loosened in his chest. Smoke rose from the chimney, and through the window, he could see Mara moving about the kitchen. She'd started supper. For the first time in 2 years, Elias Hart walked into a house that felt like a home. The smell of coffee and frying bacon pulled Elias from sleep before dawn. For a moment, disoriented, he lay in the loft, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of someone moving about his kitchen. Then memory returned Mara June, bruised and abandoned, now making breakfast in his cabin. He dressed quickly and climbed down the ladder. Pausing at the bottom, she stood at the stove with her back to him, hair pinned up properly now, wearing the same faded dress but with one of his aprons tied over it. The morning light through the window caught the threads of gold in her brown hair. You didn't need to do this, he said. She startled slightly but didn't turn around. I told you I could work. Besides, I couldn't sleep past 4 anyway. Might as well be useful. Elias settled at the table, watching her move about his kitchen with surprising familiarity. She'd found everything she needed without waking him to ask, and the coffee was strong, just how he liked it. How are you feeling? He asked carefully. Like I was thrown from a horse, she said with grim humor. But I felt worse. She set a plate in front of him, bacon, biscuits, and eggs fried perfect. It was the kind of breakfast he hadn't had since Martha died, and the similarity made his chest tight. This is too much, he said. You should be resting. Resting won't change anything. She poured herself coffee and sat across from him, moving carefully. I need to think about what comes next. Stage comes through in 3 days. Elias reminded her. Could head back east. With what money and to what? She shook her head. No. I burned those bridges when I came west. There's nothing for me back there but shame and closed doors. They ate in silence for a while. Elias found himself stealing glances at her. trying to reconcile the proper woman drinking coffee at his table with the broken creature he'd found at the depot. In the morning light, he could see more clearly the marks Thomas Gray had left, not just the obvious bruise, but the careful way she held herself, the slight flinch when she moved too quickly. "I could find work in town," Mara said suddenly. "The hotel might need—" "The hotel's run by Thomas Gray's cousin," Elias interrupted, "as is the saloon, and the general store won't hire a woman without references." Her shoulders slumped slightly. "I see." "You're welcome to stay here," he said, the words coming out rougher than intended. "Until you figure something out. I can't impose on you indefinitely." "Not imposing if you're working." He gestured at his empty plate. "Been 2 years since I had a breakfast that didn't taste like saddle leather." A small smile touched her lips, the first real one he'd seen from her. "Is that your way of saying my cooking's acceptable?" "It'll do." The moment of levity faded as quickly as it had come. Mara wrapped her hands around her coffee cup, staring into its depths. "He'll come looking," she said quietly. "Thomas, he's not the type to let things go." "Let him come." Elias's voice was flat. "This is my land. He's got no business here." "You don't know him. He's, persistent, and he has friends." "So do I." It was mostly a lie. Elias had acquaintances, people who'd nod to him in town, maybe buy him a drink. But real friends, those were thin on the ground. Still, she didn't need to know that. Mara studied him with those sage green eyes. "Why do I get the feeling you prefer your own company?" "Nothing wrong with solitude." "No," she agreed. "Sometimes it's the only safe place." There was understanding in her voice that made him uncomfortable. He stood abruptly, carrying his plate to the wash basin. "I need to check the fence line," he said. "Storm damaged some posts. You need anything from town?" "No, She paused, color rising in her cheeks. "Actually, if it's not too much trouble, there are some personal items. Female things. I could write a list." Elias felt his own face heat. 2 years of living alone had not prepared him for this. "Sure, leave it on the table. I'll stop by the store later." He escaped to the barn, grateful for the familiar routine of saddling his horse. The bay mare nickered softly, nudging his shoulder as he worked. "I know, girl," he murmured. "Strange times." The fence work was hard and cold, but it cleared his head. Every post he reset, every wire he tightened, was something solid and real, not like the complicated situation waiting back at his cabin. By the time he returned, the sun was high and his shoulders ached. He expected to find Mara resting, but instead discovered she'd been busy. The cabin was cleaner than it had been in months, floors swept, surfaces dusted, even the windows washed. His spare shirts hung on the line outside, mended and clean. She was at the table, needle in hand, working on what looked like his winter coat. "That tear's been there for a year," he said from the doorway. "I can see that." She didn't look up from her work. "Along with about 6 others. Don't you maintain anything?" "I never saw the point. It's functional." "Functional and full of holes." She bit off the thread and examined her work. "There. Now you won't freeze come the real cold." Elias hung up his hat and gun belt, acutely aware of her presence in what had been his solitary space for so long. She'd been there less than a day, and already things were different, cleaner, warmer, less empty. "Dangerous thoughts, those—" "I'll head to town now," he said. "Get those supplies." "I left the list, and—" She hesitated. "Could you ask if anyone needs sewing done, discreetly? I'm quite good with a needle, and it's work I could do here." "I'll ask." The ride to town gave him time to think, though thinking didn't help much. What was he doing, letting her stay? He'd built his life on staying uninvolved, on not needing anyone or being needed. Now he had a pregnant woman doing his laundry and mending his clothes. Samuel's eyebrows climbed nearly to his hairline when Elias handed over the list. "Some of these items seem a mite delicate for a bachelor," the shopkeeper observed. "Just fill the order. Samuel—" "She's still at your place then, the woman from the depot." Elias fixed him with a steady look. "That's my business." Sure. Samuel began gathering items. "Just saying. Folks are talking. That gray fellow was in here earlier, drunk as a skunk, saying some unflattering things about a woman who done him wrong. Gray's a fool and a liar." "Maybe so, but he's a fool with money and family. His cousin owns half this town." Samuel leaned closer, lowering his voice. "I'm not one to judge. Elias, Lord knows you've had your share of sorrow. Just be careful. Gray's not the forgiving sort." Elias paid for the supplies without comment, but Samuel's warning echoed in his mind as he made one more stop, the small house at the edge of town where Widow Patterson did laundry and mending for those who could afford it. "Sewing work, Mrs." Patterson peered at him suspiciously. "Since when do you care about fancy stitching?" Elias Hart. "It's not for me. I know someone looking for work. Good with a needle." Her eyes sharpened. "This wouldn't be that poor creature Gray brought in and then abandoned. Would it hurt she's staying with you?" "You hurt a lot for someone who minds her own business." She snorted. "In this town, please, but I might have some overflow work. If she's truly skilled. Lord knows these miners are hard on their clothes, and my eyes aren't what they were." It was something, at least. Elias thanked her and headed home, the package of supplies burning like a brand in his saddlebags. The domesticity of it all sat uneasily on his shoulders. He found Mara in the barn, of all places, talking softly to his horses. She had her hand extended to the skittish mare he'd bought last spring, the one that still shied from most people. "Easy, sweet girl," she was murmuring. "I know. Men are frightening creatures, aren't they? But we survive them." The mare lipped at her palm, accepting the offered bit of carrot. Elias stood frozen in the doorway, watching this small miracle. That horse had kicked 2 handlers and bitten the last man who'd tried to gentle her. "She likes you," he said finally. Mara turned. Not startled this time. "She's been hurt. It makes her cautious, but not mean. There's a difference. Most folks can't see it." "I'm not most folks." She gave the mare one last pat and came toward him. "Did you get everything?" "Yes." He handed her the package, trying not to notice how their fingers brushed in the exchange. "And Mrs. Patterson might have sewing work, if you're interested." Her face lit up, the first real joy he'd seen from her. "Really, oh, that's wonderful. I was worried." She stopped herself. "Thank you." "Just being neighborly," he said, falling back on the familiar phrase. "Is that what we're calling it?" There was something in her tone, not quite teasing but not entirely serious either. It made him want to smile, which was alarming enough that he turned away. "Supper in an hour?" she asked. "You don't need to—" "Elias." His name on her lips stopped him short. "I need to feel useful. Let me do this." He nodded without turning back, not trusting what might show on his face. That evening, as they ate the stew she'd made from his meager supplies, the cabin felt different again. Not just cleaner or warmer, but fuller somehow, like it was remembering how to be a home. "Tell me about her," Mara said suddenly. Elias's spoon paused halfway to his mouth. "Who?" "Your wife. This was her kitchen, wasn't it? The way you look at things sometimes, like you're seeing ghosts." He set down his spoon carefully. "We don't need to talk about that." "No, we don't need to, but silence can be its own kind of prison." She met his eyes. "I was married for 3 years. He died in a factory accident, crushed by machinery that should have been replaced years before. I thought I'd die too, from the grief. Then I thought I'd die from the poverty. Then I just kept living." Martha died of fever. Elias heard himself say, 2 winters ago. Doctor couldn't do anything. I held her hand and watched her fade away, one breath at a time. I'm sorry. So am I. He picked up his spoon again. She would have liked you. Would have scolded me for letting the place go like I did. She sounds wise. She was. The words came easier than expected. Too wise to marry a stubborn fool like me, but she did it anyway. They finished their meal in companionable silence. Later, as Mara cleared the table and Elias tended the fire, he realized something had shifted. They were still strangers, still dancing around trust like it might bite, but they were strangers who understood loss, who knew the weight of empty spaces. It wasn't much, but it was something. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows. Winter was coming in earnest now, and with it, all the challenges of survival in this harsh land. But for tonight, the cabin was warm, his belly was full, and he wasn't alone. Elias hadn't wanted any of this. But as he watched Mara move about his kitchen, humming softly to herself, he wondered if sometimes the things you didn't want were exactly what you needed. 2 weeks passed in a rhythm that surprised them both with its ease. Mara rose before dawn to start breakfast. Elias worked his land and tended his stock, and evenings found them sharing quiet meals by firelight. It was domestic in a way that should have chafed at Elias, but instead felt like slipping into old, comfortable boots. The sewing work from Mrs. Patterson proved steady. Mara's fingers flew over the fabric, mending tears and hemming pants with a skill that impressed even the picky widow. The small income wasn't much, but Mara hoarded every penny in a tin she kept on the kitchen shelf, adding to it with careful pride. "Planning your escape fund?" Elias asked one evening, watching her count the coins. "Planning for possibilities," she corrected, not looking up. "A woman without options is a woman at mercy." He couldn't argue with that. The bruise on her face had faded to yellow-green, soon to be nothing but memory. Other things healed slower. Elias noticed how she still flinched at unexpected sounds, how she positioned herself always with a clear path to the door. Trust, he was learning, was not rebuilt quickly. For his part, Elias found himself adjusting to her presence in ways that unsettled him. Coming in from the cold to find coffee waiting, finding his clothes mended before he even realized they needed it. Having someone to talk to or not talk to in the evening hours that used to drag so long. "You're spoiling me," he told her one morning, surveying another hearty breakfast. "Hardly. You're the easiest man to please I've ever met. Hot food and clean clothes, and you act like I've hung the moon." "Maybe my standards are low. Or maybe," she said softly, "you've been alone too long." He had no answer for that. The weather turned bitter, with snow falling thick and steady. Elias worked harder to keep the animals fed and watered, breaking ice on the troughs each morning and hauling extra hay from the barn. Mara insisted on helping despite his protests. "I'm pregnant, not dying," she said firmly, wrapping herself in one of his old coats. "And I'll not sit idle while you work yourself to exhaustion." She couldn't lift the heavy bales, but she could scatter feed for the chickens, gather eggs, and keep the barn cat's bowls full. Watching her work, cheeks pink from cold and eyes bright with purpose, Elias felt something dangerous stir in his chest. One afternoon, returning from checking his trap lines, he found her in an unexpected state. She sat at the table with tears streaming down her face, a letter clutched in her hands. "What's wrong?" He was beside her instantly, fight-or-flight instincts engaged. "Is it Gray, has he?" No. She wiped her eyes with her sleeve, laughing shakily. "I'm being foolish. It's just Mrs. Patterson paid me extra this week. Said my work was the finest she'd seen and she'd be recommending me to others." "That's good news, isn't it?" "The best." Fresh tears spilled over. "You don't understand. These past months, since James died, I've been surviving on charity and pity, each handout making me smaller. And then Thomas, taking even that dignity away. But this," she held up the coins, "this I earned, with my own skill." Elias awkwardly patted her shoulder, uncertain how to handle feminine tears. Martha had rarely cried, and when she did, he'd usually been the cause. "You're stronger than you know," he said finally. "I'm learning to be—" She covered his hand with hers briefly, then stood. "I'm sorry. These moods come on me sometimes. The baby, I think—" It was the first time either had directly acknowledged her condition since that first day. The word hung between them, weighted with unspoken questions. "When?" he asked simply. "Late spring, May, perhaps early June." Her hand moved unconsciously to her middle. "I should be gone by then." "Should you?" The question surprised them both. Mara busied herself at the stove, not answering. Elias retreated to the barn, cursing himself for a fool. What was he thinking the woman was carrying another man's child? Running from a complicated past. The last thing she needed was pressure from him. But that night, as they sat reading by lamplight, he with his almanac, she with a book of poetry she'd brought in her meager belongings, the domesticity of it all overwhelmed him. When had his isolated cabin become this peaceful haven? "Read something aloud," he said impulsively. She looked up, startled. "You want to hear poetry?" "Why not? Winter nights are long." A smile played at her lips as she flipped through pages. "Very well. This one's by Emily Dickinson. Hope is the thing with feathers that perches in the soul, and sings the tune without the words, and never stops at all." Her voice was soft, cultured, so different from the rough tones he heard in town. Elias closed his eyes, letting the words wash over him. When she finished, the silence felt full rather than empty. "That was nice," he said inadequately. James loved poetry. He'd save his pennies to buy books, even when we needed food. There was no bitterness in her voice, only fond remembrance. "I sold most of them after he died, but I kept this one." "Tell me about him." It was the first time he'd asked about her past directly. Mara marked her place carefully before answering. "He was a dreamer, always talking about the big things we'd do someday, the places we'd see. He worked at the textile mill, but in his mind, he was already somewhere else, California, maybe, or Colorado, anywhere but Philadelphia." "Is that why you came west following his dream?" "Partly, and partly because there was nothing left there. His family blamed me for encouraging his wild ideas. My family had disowned me for marrying beneath my station. When I saw Thomas's advertisement, it seemed like a chance." "Some chance," Elias said bitterly. "Yes, well, we tell ourselves stories to survive. I told myself a successful merchant would be stable, responsible, different from James." She laughed without humor. "I should have known. The story was too pretty, too convenient. Real life is messier." "That it is." They lapsed into comfortable quiet. The fire crackled. Wind howled outside, but inside was warm and safe. Elias found himself watching her over his almanac, the way lamplight caught in her hair, the delicate movement of her hands as she turned pages. Dangerous thoughts, again. The next morning brought trouble in the form of hoofbeats approaching fast. Elias was in the barn when he heard them, and something in their urgency had him reaching for the rifle he kept there. 3 riders pulled up in his yard. Thomas Gray and 2 others Elias recognized as drinking companions. Rough men who hired out for whatever dirty work needed doing. "Hart," Gray called out, still mounted. "We need to talk." Elias stepped into view, rifle casual in his hands but ready. "Nothing to talk about. Gray, this is private property." "That's where you're wrong." Gray's face was flushed. Whether from cold or drink, Elias couldn't tell. "You've got something that belongs to me." "I've got nothing of yours." "That woman in there says different. We had an agreement. Money changed hands. That makes her mine until I say otherwise." The cabin door opened and Mara stepped out. wrapped in Elias's old coat. Her face was pale but determined. "I belong to no one. Mr. Gray," she said clearly. "Whatever money you took was theft, not payment." Gray's face darkened. "You lying little?" "Careful," Elias warned, rifle shifting slightly. "Lady's made her position clear. Now it's time for you to move along. Or what you'll shoot 3 men over a used woman," Gray sneered. "She tell you she's carrying another man's bastard damaged goods. Heart, but I'm willing to overlook that generous man that I am." "Only damage I see is what you did to her face," Elias said evenly. "Now get off my land before I forget my manners entirely." One of Gray's companions, a mean-looking fellow with a scar across his jaw, spoke up. "Thomas, maybe we should—" "Shut up, Bridger." Gray's eyes never left Elias. "This isn't over. Hart, you can't keep her here forever. And when you get tired of playing house with another man's leavings, I'll still be waiting. You'll be waiting a long time." Gray spat in the snow. "We'll see about that. This town's got laws about harboring runaway women, and my cousin sits on the town council." "Your cousin can sit wherever he pleases. Doesn't change the fact that Miss June is a free woman making her own choices. Now get." For a moment, violence hung in the air like smoke. Then Gray wheeled his horse around, his companions following. "This isn't finished," he called over his shoulder. They watched until the riders disappeared over the ridge. Only then did Elias lower his rifle, turning to find Mara trembling despite her brave front. "He won't give up," she said. "He's that kind of man, the kind who can't stand losing." "Let him stew. He can't do anything as long as you're here." "And when I'm not? When spring comes and I have to leave?" Her voice caught. "He'll be waiting, just like he said." Without thinking, Elias reached out and grasped her shoulders gently. "Spring's a long way off. Lot can happen between now and then." She looked up at him, those sage green eyes full of fear and hope warring with each other. "Why are you doing this, really?" "Because it's right," he said simply. "Because someone should have stood up for you long before now. And because—" He paused, struggling with words that didn't come easy. "Because maybe I'm tired of being alone in that cabin, talking to horses and shadows." "Elias," she whispered. He released her shoulders, stepping back. "Go inside. It's cold." But she caught his hand as he turned away. "Thank you for everything. I don't know how to repay." "No debts between us," he said gruffly. "Just be safe. That's all I need." That night, Elias lay wakeful in his loft, listening to the familiar sounds of the cabin settling. But underneath was something new, the soft breathing from the room below. The presence of another person in his carefully solitary world. Gray's visit had clarified things. The man wouldn't give up, would keep pushing until something gave. And when spring came, when Mara had her baby, what then? She couldn't stay here forever, no matter how natural it had begun to feel. Unless— He cut off that thought before it could fully form. Too dangerous, too complicated. He'd failed at marriage once, failed to keep Martha safe from the fever that took her. What business did he have thinking about trying again? But as sleep finally claimed him, his dreams were full of sage green eyes and the scent of morning coffee, of a cabin that felt like home and a woman who'd brought life back to its empty rooms. Spring was coming. Yes, but winter nights were long, and sometimes, in the darkness, a man could pretend that morning would never come. Christmas came to Wyoming territory with a blizzard that trapped them inside for 3 days. Elias had seen worse storms, but this one felt different perhaps because he wasn't facing it alone. "We should have a proper Christmas dinner," Mara announced on the second morning of their confinement, surveying their supplies with a determined air. "When was the last time you celebrated?" Elias tried to remember. "Martha's last Christmas, 2 years back." "Then it's time." She rolled up her sleeves, her growing belly now obvious beneath her dress. The baby had begun to show properly these past weeks, making her condition undeniable. I'll need you to fetch the preserved berries from the root cellar, and if you've got any maple syrup hidden away. You're nesting, he observed, amused despite himself. She paused in her inventory, color rising in her cheeks. Perhaps I am. Is that so wrong? Not wrong at all. They worked together to transform the simple cabin into something festive. Mara fashioned decorations from pine boughs and scraps of red fabric from her sewing work. Elias carved a small star from wood to top the arrangement. It wasn't much, but the cabin felt warmer for the effort. James and I never had a real Christmas, Mara said as she worked on their dinner. Always promised next year would be better. Next year we'd have money for a goose, presents, the whole thing. She smiled sadly. Never did get that next year. This year's real enough, Elias said quietly. She looked at him across the kitchen, flour dusting her cheeks, eyes bright with unshed tears. Yes, it is. The storm broke on Christmas Eve, leaving behind a world transformed to pristine white. They ate their feast venison roast, cornbread, preserved berries made into sauce by candlelight. The best china Martha had saved for special occasions finally seeing use again. I have something for you, Mara said after dinner, producing a carefully wrapped bundle. Elias stared at it. You didn't need to. Open it. Inside was a shirt, new made from fabric she must have bought with her precious earnings. The stitching was immaculate, every seam perfect. When did you have time for this? Late nights, early mornings. She fidgeted with her hands. I wanted to give you something. You've given me so much. Mara. He ran his fingers over the fine work, throat tight. I don't know what to say. Say you'll wear it sometimes and think kindly of the seamstress. Always do. He retreated to the loft, returning with his own offering, a small wooden cradle he'd been working on in secret. It was simple, but sturdy, sanded smooth and carved with small flowers along the rails. Mara's hand flew to her mouth. Oh, Elias! Every baby needs a bed, he said gruffly, setting it near the fire. Figured you could use it wherever you end up. She ran her fingers along the wood, tears flowing freely now. It's beautiful, perfect. She looked up at him. But I can't take this when I go. It belongs here, in this home. The words hung between them, weighted with possibility. Before either could speak further, a sound outside made them both freeze horses. Multiple riders, approaching through the snow. Elias grabbed his rifle, peering out the window. Stay inside. But it wasn't Thomas Gray who rode up. Instead, Elias recognized Judge Morrison from town, along with the sheriff and 2 deputies. His stomach dropped. Evening, Hart. The judge called out. Mind if we come in cold night for official business? Elias had no choice but to let them enter. They filed in, tracking snow, their eyes taking in the domestic scene, the decorations, the remnants of dinner. Mara standing by the hearth with her hand protectively over her belly. Miss June, the judge said, tipping his hat. Or is it Mrs. Gray? It's Miss June, she said firmly. I never married Thomas Gray. That's the question, isn't it? The judge produced some papers. Mr. Gray has filed a complaint. Says you entered into a binding agreement, took his money under false pretenses, and are now refusing to honor your commitment. He's lying. Elias interjected. He abandoned her at the depot after. He caught himself before mentioning the violence. These men might not care about a woman being struck. After discovering I was widowed and with child. Mara finished calmly. He took what money I had left and cast me out. Mr. Hart was kind enough to offer shelter. The sheriff, a decent man named Walsh, whom Elias had dealt with before, looked uncomfortable. Thing is, ma'am, Gray's got papers, letters where you agreed to marry him, money order receipts showing he paid your passage. Which makes this a legal matter. Judge Morrison added. You'll need to come to town. Sort this out proper-like. She's not going anywhere with you, Elias said flatly. Now, Hart, don't make this difficult, Walsh warned. We're not arresting her. Just need her testimony to settle the matter. On Christmas Eve, in her condition, law doesn't take holidays, the judge said, though he too looked somewhat ashamed. Look, we can do this civilized. Miss June comes to town tomorrow. We hold a hearing. Get this cleared up. Otherwise, Gray's threatening to press charges for theft and breach of promise. It's all right, Mara said quietly. I'll come. I have nothing to hide. After the men left, Elias paced the cabin like a caged wolf. This is Gray pushing his weight around. His cousin must have gotten to the judge. Perhaps, but running will only make it worse. Mara sank into a chair, suddenly looking exhausted. I should have known this peace couldn't last. You don't have to face them alone. She looked up at him with a wan smile. Don't I, Elias? You've done more than enough. This isn't your fight. The hell it isn't. The vehemence in his voice surprised them both. You think I'll just stand by while they railroad you into something you don't want? What choice do we have if the law says I owe him? The law can be wrong, and judges can be bought. He knelt beside her chair, taking her hands in his. They were cold, trembling slightly. Listen to me, we'll go to town tomorrow, but we go prepared. There's got to be someone who saw Gray hit you, leave you at the depot. Someone who'll speak up. And if there isn't, if everyone's too scared of the Gray family to tell the truth, then we make our own truth. The words came out before he could stop them, the idea crystallizing even as he spoke. Marry me. Mara went very still. What? Marry me, he repeated, the rightness of it settling over him like snow. Tomorrow, before the hearing, a married woman can't be forced to honor a promise to another man. Elias, you can't. I'm carrying another man's child. I have nothing to offer you. You have everything. He gripped her hands tighter. You've brought life back to this place, to me, these past weeks. I wake up looking forward to the day instead of just enduring it. That's worth more than anything. You're talking about a real marriage. Real as we want to make it. I'm not asking for anything you're not willing to give, but I am asking, let me protect you. Let me give that baby a name, a home. Tears spilled down her cheeks. Why would you do this? Because somewhere between that first breakfast and tonight, I fell in love with your kind heart. The words he'd held back for weeks tumbled out. Because the thought of you leaving come spring makes me feel hollow. Because I want to wake up every morning knowing you're here, safe, where you belong. Oh, Elias. She freed one hand to touch his face. You dear foolish man. Don't you know I've been falling too every day, watching you work, seeing your gentle strength, the way you never asked for more than I could give. Is that a yes? It's a yes. She leaned down and kissed him softly, a promise sealed. Though Lord knows what people will say. Let them say what they want. Never cared much for gossip anyway. They sat by the fire late into the night, planning. Come morning, they'd ride to town and find Reverend Mills before anyone could stop them. It wouldn't be the wedding either had imagined in younger days. But it would be real and binding, and theirs. Are you sure? Mara asked one more time as the fire burned low. Once done, there's no taking it back. You'll be tied to me and another man's child forever. Not another man's, Elias corrected firmly. Mine, ours. That baby will know no father but me, if you'll allow it. Fresh tears came then, but these were different cleansing. Hopeful. James would have liked you, she whispered. He would have wanted this for us. Martha, too. Elias admitted. She always said I was too stubborn to see what was right in front of me. Guess it just took the right woman to open my eyes. They parted at the bedroom door, both aware that tomorrow would change everything. But as Elias climbed to his loft one last time as a bachelor, He felt no regret, only a bone-deep certainty that this was right, was meant to be. Down below, he heard Mara moving about, probably checking the cradle he'd made. Tomorrow that cradle would have a home for certain. Tomorrow, a new family would begin. The wind had died completely, leaving the world in pristine silence through his small window. Stars blazed in the clear sky, and Elias thought he'd never seen them shine so bright. It was still Christmas Eve for a few more hours, and he'd received the greatest gift of all, a second chance at love, a future no longer empty but full of promise. Tomorrow would bring challenges. Thomas Gray wouldn't give up easily, and the town gossips would have a field day. But tonight, in the peace of his cabin with Mara safe below, Elias Hart allowed himself to believe in Christmas miracles. After all, hadn't one just agreed to marry him? The morning after Christmas dawned cold and bright, with the kind of crystalline clarity that made the Wyoming mountains look close enough to touch. Elias was up before first light, shaving with more care than he'd taken in years. His hands were steady, but his mind raced with what lay ahead. When he came down from the loft, Mara was already dressed in her best dress, the blue one she'd arrived in, now clean and mended. She'd done something different with her hair, pinning it up in a style that made her look older, more dignified. The bruises were long gone, but he could see new shadows under her eyes. "Did you sleep at all?" he asked. "Some." She smoothed her skirts nervously. "Elias, are you certain about this? In the light of day?" "I'm certain." He crossed to her, taking her hands. "More certain than I've been about anything since Martha died. Question is, are you—" "Yes." The word came out firm, decisive. "I just worry what this will cost you. Your reputation, your standing in town." "Never had much of either to lose." He squeezed her hands gently. "We should go. Want to catch Reverend Mills before the rest of the town wakes up." They rode double on his horse, Mara sitting sideways in front of him, his arms secure around her waist, the intimacy of it her warmth against his chest. The scent of her hair made his heart pound like a green boy's. How long since he'd held a woman this close? Cinder Hollow was just stirring as they arrived. Smoke rose from chimneys, and somewhere a rooster crowed. They made their way to the small parsonage beside the church, where Reverend Mills answered the door in his nightshirt and cap. "Elias Hart." The Reverend blinked in surprise. "And Miss—" "Soon to be Mrs. Hart," Elias said. "We need you to marry us. Reverend, now." Mills's eyes widened, taking in Mara's obvious condition. "I see. Well, this is irregular. There are usually banns to be read, preparations." "No time for that," Elias interrupted. "Will you do it or not?" The Reverend studied them both, his weathered face thoughtful. He was a good man. Mills, one of the few in town who preached love over judgment. "Come in," he said finally. "Let me dress properly. Can't perform a wedding in my night clothes." 20 minutes later, they stood in the empty church, morning light streaming through plain glass windows. Mills had roused his wife to serve as witness, along with her sister who was visiting for Christmas. The women flanked Mara like protective bookends, shooting dark looks at the door as if daring anyone to interrupt. "Dearly beloved," Mills began, his voice carrying in the quiet space, "we are gathered here on this blessed Christmas morning to join this man and this woman in holy matrimony." Elias barely heard the familiar words. His attention was fixed on Mara, the way the light caught in her hair, the slight tremble in her voice as she repeated her vows, the tears that gathered but didn't fall. When it came time for the ring, he produced Martha's cleaned and polished, ready for a new beginning. "With this ring, I thee wed," he said, sliding it onto Mara's finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been waiting for her. "I now pronounce you husband and wife. What God has joined together, let no man put asunder." Mills smiled kindly. "You may kiss your bride, Elias. The kiss was brief, appropriate for the setting, but Elias felt it all the way to his boots when they parted. Mara was smiling through her tears. "Well," she whispered, "I suppose we've done it now." "No supposing about it," he replied. "You're stuck with me, Mrs. Hart." They signed the register, making it official. Mill's wife pressed Mara's hand warmly. "Don't you mind what anyone says? Dear, love finds its own way. And that's between you and the Lord." They were just leaving the church when the thunder of hooves announced trouble. Thomas Gray rode up with his same two companions, plus the sheriff and Judge Morrison. Gray's face went purple when he saw them. "You conniving witch," he spat, swinging down from his horse. "Think you can escape your obligations by spreading your legs for this hermit?" Elias stepped forward, but Mara caught his arm. "Mr. Gray," she said calmly, "I believe you know my husband, Elias Hart." "A husband?" Gray whirled on the judge. "This is fraud. She can't just—" "Appears she can and did," Sheriff Walsh said mildly. "That's Reverend Mills there with the register, all legal and proper." "She owes me." Gray's hand moved toward his gun, but froze when he found himself looking down the barrel of Elias's rifle, drawn so fast most hadn't seen him move. "Only thing you're owed is a horsewhipping," Elias said quietly. "But I'll settle for you leaving my wife alone." "Your wife?" Gray laughed bitterly. "You just inherited another man's bastard. Hart. Hope she's worth it when that brat comes out looking nothing like you." "Thomas, enough." Judge Morrison intervened. "The lady has made her choice. The marriage is legal. Your claim is void." "This isn't over," Gray snarled. "You think you've won, I'll make your lives miserable. No one in this town will do business with you. No one will—" "Thomas Gray, Mrs." Mills stepped forward, all 5 feet of her bristling with indignation. "You shame your mother's memory, carrying on so— This is Christmas morning, in front of God's house, and you're acting like a spoiled child denied a toy. You don't understand." "I understand plenty. Now get, before I take a switch to you like I did when you were 12 and put a snake in the collection plate." Amazingly, Gray backed down. Something about being scolded by the Reverend's wife in front of witnesses took the wind from his sails. He mounted his horse, but couldn't resist one last threat. "This isn't finished. Hart, you or that whore you married." Elias raised his rifle slightly. "Call my wife that again and it will be finished. Permanent-like." Gray wheeled his horse and galloped off, his companions trailing behind. The judge and sheriff lingered a moment. "Congratulations on your marriage," Morrison said dryly. "Though your timing is interesting." "Man can marry when he chooses," Elias replied. "Indeed. Well, I suppose that settles the legal matter." The judge tipped his hat to Mara. "Mrs. Hart, I wish you happiness in your union." After they left, Reverend Mills approached. "You've made an enemy today, Elias. Gray won't forget this." "Let him remember. I've got what matters." Mills smiled. "Yes, I believe you do. Take care of each other. And Elias, bring your wife to services sometime. Been too long since we've seen you." The ride back to the cabin was quiet, both of them processing what had just happened. Married. The word felt foreign in Elias's mind, yet right somehow. "Thank you," Mara said softly as their home came into view. "For what?" "For saving me, again." He helped her down from the horse, holding her perhaps a moment longer than necessary. "Seems to me we saved each other." Inside, the cabin felt different. Same walls, same furniture, but the very air had changed. This was their home now, not just his. "I should start dinner," Mara said, moving toward the kitchen. "In a minute." Elias caught her hand, drawing her close. "First, I want to kiss my wife proper, without an audience." The kiss was longer this time, deeper, full of promise and tentative passion. When they parted, both were breathless. "Elias," she began, but he pressed a finger to her lips. "I know what you're going to say, that we need time, that you're not ready for more, and that's fine. We've got all the time in the world now." Relief and something else disappointment flickered in her eyes. "You're a patient man. Learned it breaking horses. The best things can't be rushed." She laughed softly. "Comparing me to a horse now?" "Lord, no. Horses are much simpler." The tension broken. They moved into the familiar rhythm of their day, but with new awareness. Every accidental touch sparked. Every glance held weight. They were dancing around each other, learning the steps of this new arrangement. That evening, as they sat by the fire, he reading, she sewing, Mara spoke into the comfortable silence. "I want you to know something. What Gray said about the baby doesn't matter." "It does." She set down her sewing. "This child will be yours in every way that counts. I want that understood between us." "Already is." He looked up from his book. "That baby will be born to married folks, raised with love, given my name. That's all that matters." "Your name?" She tested the words. "Baby Heart. I like the sound of that. Got a nice ring to it." They smiled at each other across the lamplight, and something settled between them. Not passion yet, not the full bloom of marriage, but a foundation, commitment, partnership. The rest would come with time. Outside, snow began to fall again. Soft and silent, the world was blanketed in white, hiding the rough edges, making everything clean and new. Inside, Elias Hart sat with his wife, and felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Hope. Spring would come, bringing with it a child and new challenges. Thomas Gray would surely cause trouble. The town would gossip. But right now, in this moment, none of that mattered. They were married, bound by law and growing affection. Whatever came next, they would face it together. "Merry Christmas, Mrs. Hart," he said softly. "Merry Christmas, husband." The word was a gift, wrapped in promise and tied with trust. And as the snow continued to fall, blessing their union with its gentle grace, Elias Hart knew he'd received the greatest Christmas miracle of all, a second chance at love, and a woman brave enough to take it with him. The peace lasted exactly 3 weeks. January had settled over Wyoming with a vengeance, bringing storms that kept them cabin-bound for days at a time. Elias didn't mind these forced intimacies were teaching him his new wife's rhythms, the way she hummed while kneading bread, how she absently rubbed her growing belly when she thought he wasn't looking, the small sighs she made while sleeping in the bed they now shared. Though he kept carefully to his side, it was during a brief break in the weather that trouble returned. Elias had gone to check his trap lines, leaving Mara with the rifle and strict instructions to bar the door. When he returned at dusk, he found the door hanging open and his wife gone. Boot prints in the snow told the story: 3 men, a struggle, drag marks toward the barn. Elias's blood turned to ice. He pulled his pistol and moved silently across the yard, every sense alert. He heard them before he saw them, rough voices and ugly laughter coming from inside the barn. "Thought you were too good for me, did you?" Thomas Gray's voice, slurred with drink. "Had to go spreading your legs for that hermit instead." "I'm a married woman." Mara's voice was steady despite her fear. "You have no claim on me." "Marriage." Gray spat the word. "A sham to avoid your obligations. But Hart's not here now. Is he just you and us?" Elias eased around the barn door, taking in the scene. Gray and his 2 companions had Mara cornered against the wall. Her dress was torn at the shoulder, her hair fallen loose, but she stood straight with her chin raised. "My husband will be back soon," she said. "Counting on it," one of the other men said, Bridger, the scarred one. "Thomas here's got plans for your husband too." "Enough talk." Gray moved closer to Mara. "Time you learned your place." Elias stepped into view, cocking his pistol. The sound was loud in the confined space. "Her place is with me. Step away from my wife." The three men spun around. Gray's hand went for his gun, but froze when he saw Elias already had the drop on them. "Hart," Gray tried to sound casual. "We were just having a conversation with Mrs. Hart here. No harm done." Funny way of conversing, cornering a pregnant woman in a barn. Elias kept his voice level, but inside he was calculating. 3 men, all armed. If shooting started, Mara could get hurt. "Drop your guns," he ordered, slow and easy. 3 against 1. Hart. Bridger pointed out. "Not good odds." "Good enough." Elias shifted his aim to Bridger. "You first. Gun on the ground." "Do it," Gray said suddenly, surprising everyone. "All of you, drop them." His companions looked confused, but complied. Gray smiled, and something in that smile made Elias's neck prickle. "Smart man," Gray said. "Because I didn't come here just to talk. Boys." The barn door burst open behind Elias. 2 more men rushed in. He spun, trying to cover everyone. But there were too many. Someone grabbed his gun arm. He threw an elbow, heard a grunt, but more hands seized him. "No," Mara started forward, but Gray caught her arm roughly. "Hold him," Gray ordered as Elias struggled against the grip of 4 men. "Time we settled this proper." They forced Elias to his knees. Gray strutted over, pulling on leather gloves with deliberate slowness. "You cost me face, Hart, made me look a fool in front of the whole town. Man can't let that stand." The first punch caught Elias in the jaw. Snapping his head back, he tasted blood. "Stop it!" Mara tried to break free. "You're a coward. Thomas Gray, 5 men against 1. "Shut her up," Gray said, never taking his eyes off Elias. One of the men clamped a hand over Mara's mouth. Her eyes, wide with fear and fury, met Elias's. "Let her go," Elias said through bloody teeth. "Your quarrel's with me." "Oh, I intend to." Gray hit him again, this time in the stomach. "After you've learned your lesson, after you understand what happens when someone takes what's mine." The beating was methodical, designed to hurt without killing. Elias had taken beatings before from his father, from other cowboys, from life itself. He knew how to retreat inside himself, to endure, but hearing Mara's muffled cries made it harder. Finally, Gray stepped back, breathing hard. "Had enough, Hart. Ready to be reasonable." Elias spat blood. "Go to hell." Gray's face darkened. "Still proud? Well, maybe this will change your mind." He turned to Mara. "Pretty thing. Isn't she even with that belly? Shame if something happened." The rage that filled Elias was ice-cold and absolute. He erupted from the ground, breaking free through sheer fury. His fist connected with the nearest man's jaw. Dropping him, he grabbed for a gun, any gun. The blast was deafening in the enclosed space. Elias felt the bullet tear through his shoulder, spinning him around. He hit the ground hard, vision graying at the edges. "Elias!" Mara's scream cut through the ringing in his ears. "Damn fool." Gray stood over him, smoking pistol in hand. "Could have done this easy." Through the haze of pain, Elias saw Mara break free again. This time, instead of running to him, she grabbed something from the wall, a pitchfork. She swung it in a wide arc, catching Bridger across the chest, drawing blood. Get back!" she yelled, positioning herself between Elias and the men. "All of you, get back!" "Crazy woman." Gray raised his gun toward her. "No!" Elias tried to rise, to shield her, but his body wouldn't cooperate. The barn door exploded open. Sheriff Walsh burst in, rifle raised, with 3 deputies behind him. "Nobody move," Walsh roared. "Gray, drop that gun, now!" For a moment, everything balanced on a knife's edge. Then Gray lowered his pistol, his face twisting with frustration. "Sheriff, we were just—" "Save it." Walsh looked around, taking in the scene: Elias bleeding on the ground, Mara standing guard with a pitchfork, 5 men looking guilty as sin. "Miller, get Doc Brennan. Rest of you. Arrest these men." "On what charge?" Gray demanded. "Assault, attempted murder, breaking and entering." Walsh's voice was granite. "And we'll likely think of more. Bridger, that chest needs tending. You can explain to the doc how a pregnant woman managed to pitchfork you." As the deputies rounded up Gray and his men, Walsh knelt beside Elias. "Easy there. Hart, Doc's coming." "How?" Elias managed through gritted teeth. "Mrs. Patterson saw riders heading this way. Didn't like the look of them. Came straight to me." Walsh glanced at Mara, who had dropped the pitchfork to kneel beside her husband. "You've got good neighbors, Hart, and a brave wife." Mara pressed her shawl against Elias's shoulder, trying to stop the bleeding. Her face was pale but determined. "You're going to be fine," she said fiercely. "Do you hear me? You're going to be fine." Elias reached up with his good hand to touch her face. "You pitchforked him." A hysterical laugh escaped her. "I did. Oh, Lord, I did." "That's my girl," he whispered, and passed out. He woke in his own bed, shoulder-bound and throbbing. Weak winter sunlight slanted through the window. Mara dozed in a chair beside the bed, one hand resting on his arm, as if to assure herself he was still there. "Hey," he croaked. Her eyes flew open. "Elias, oh, thank God. How do you feel?" "Like I've been shot." He tried to sit up, grimaced. "How long?" 2 days. Doc Brennan got the bullet out. Said you were lucky inch to the left and—" She stopped, swallowing hard. "Gray?" "In jail. All of them. Sheriff Walsh says they'll stand trial." Her hand tightened on his arm. "It's over. Elias, he can't hurt us anymore." "You were magnificent." The memory surfaced through the fog of pain. "A pitchfork. Where did that come from?" "I don't know. I couldn't let them hurt you anymore." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "When I saw you fall, saw the blood, I thought, I can't lose you too. I can't. Shh." He covered her hand with his. "Takes more than a bullet to kill an old cowboy. I'm too stubborn to die." She gave a watery laugh. "Yes, you are. Stubbornest man I ever met. Good thing you married me then." "Best thing I ever did." She leaned down and kissed him gently. "I love you, Elias Hart. I should have said it sooner, but I was scared. Scared to hope. But when I thought I might lose you—" "I love you too," he said, the words coming easier than expected. "Have for a while now. Just took getting shot to admit it." "Men," she said with fond exasperation. "Always doing things the hard way." Over the next days, as Elias healed, visitors came by with news. Thomas Gray and his accomplices had been bound over for trial. The judge, a different one from Morrison, who'd recused himself due to family connections, wasn't sympathetic to Gray's claims. "Seems folks were tired of the Gray family throwing their weight around," Sheriff Walsh reported. "Once the dam broke, everyone had a story. Cheated business deals, intimidation, worse. Thomas is looking at serious prison time." "What about his threats?" Mara asked. "He said he'd make sure no one in town would deal with us." Walsh grinned. "Funny thing about that, soon as word got out what happened, brave pregnant woman defending her shot husband with a pitchfork, folks started choosing sides. And most didn't choose Gray's." "Indeed. Over the following weeks, they had more visitors than in the previous 2 years combined. Women brought food and baby clothes. Men offered help with Elias's work while he recovered. Even Crusty Samuel from the general store rode out with supplies on credit, waving away payment. "Heroes of the county," he said with gruff pride. "Can't have heroes going without coffee and flour." "Heroes," Elias muttered after he left. For getting shot in my own barn. For standing up to bullies, Mara corrected. For protecting what's yours. People respect that. As his shoulder healed, Elias found himself growing into this new life. He and Mara moved together now with easy intimacy, her hand on his good shoulder as she passed, his fingers tangling in her hair as she leaned against him by the fire. The careful distance of their early marriage had vanished, replaced by something deeper. One night in late January, as a blizzard howled outside, Mara turned to him in their bed. "Are you healed enough?" she asked softly. He understood what she was asking. "If we're careful." "Then be careful," she whispered, and kissed him. They came together gently, mindful of his shoulder and her condition, but with a passion too long contained. Afterward, lying entwined while the storm raged, Elias felt the last walls around his heart crumble. "No regrets?" Mara asked into the darkness. "Only that it took so long to find you." She was quiet for a moment. "James would be happy for me. For us. Is that strange to say?" "No, Martha would be happy too. They loved us. They'd want us to live." "Then let's live," she said fiercely. "Really live. No more fear. No more looking over our shoulders. Just us and this life we're building." "And the baby," Elias added, hand spreading over her belly. "And the baby." She covered his hand with hers. "Our baby." Outside, the blizzard continued its assault on their small cabin, but inside was warmth and love and the promise of spring. Thomas Gray was gone, locked away where he couldn't hurt them. The past was settling into memory, making room for the future. They had survived the worst storm, not the one outside, but the one that had threatened to tear apart everything they were building together. Now, healing in body and heart, they could finally look forward without fear. The baby would come with the spring flowers, and by then, Elias thought as sleep claimed him, they would be ready. A real family, forged in hardship but tempered by love. It was more than he dared hope for. It was everything. The pain started just after midnight on a rain-soft April night. Elias woke to find Mara sitting on the edge of the bed, one hand pressed to her back, breathing carefully through clenched teeth. "Is it time?" he asked, instantly alert. "I think, yes." She turned to him, face pale in the moonlight. "The baby's coming." Elias was out of bed in an instant, lighting lamps, stoking the fire. They'd prepared for this clean linen stacked ready, water buckets filled, the cradle waiting by the fireplace. But all the preparation in the world couldn't steady his hands as he helped Mara to the kitchen, where they decided would be best for the delivery. "I need to get Mrs. Patterson," he said. The older woman had delivered half the babies in the county and had promised to come when needed. "No." Mara gripped his arm. "The rain's turned the roads to mud. It's too dangerous in the dark. We'll have to manage alone." The thought terrified him. He'd delivered calves and foals, but this was different. This was Mara. This was their child. "I can't." "What if something goes wrong?" "Then we'll face it together." She squeezed his hand through another pain. "Women have been doing this since Eve. I trust you. Elias." There was no choice. The storm that had been threatening all day broke in earnest, turning the world outside into a chaos of wind and water. They were alone. Elias had never felt more helpless or more necessary. He boiled water, tore clean cloths, held Mara's hand through the mounting pains. She was magnificent in her struggle, focused, determined, primal in a way that humbled him. "Tell me about the ranch," she gasped between contractions. "Our plans for spring." He understood what she needed: distraction, hope, a future to focus on. So he talked, painting pictures with words, the new corral he'd build, the garden she wanted to plant, the additional horses they'd buy with the money from selling yearlings. "And Sunday picnics," Mara added, managing a smile. "By the creek, under the willows, teaching our child to swim." teaching them to ride. Elias continued. Their own pony by age 5. Books, she insisted. Shelves full of books, poetry and adventures and fairy tales. Whatever you want, a whole library if it makes you happy. The hours crawled by. The storm raged. Mara's pains grew stronger, closer together. Elias had never prayed so hard in his life to God, to Martha, to anyone who might be listening. Keep her safe. Keep them both safe. Dawn was breaking, gray and watery through the rain, when Mara's demeanor changed. "It's time," she said with sudden certainty. "The baby's coming now." What followed was the longest and shortest time of Elias's life. Mara bore down with a strength that seemed to come from the earth itself. Elias knelt before her, hands ready, heart hammering. "I see the head," he said, voice cracking. "Dark hair. Mara, push again." She did, crying out with the effort, and then, in a rush of fluid and miracle, their child slipped into Elias's waiting hands. "A girl," he breathed, staring down at the tiny, perfect form. "Mara, we have a daughter." The baby's cry, thin and fierce, filled the cabin. Elias cleared her mouth and nose with trembling fingers, wrapped her in clean cloth, and placed her on Mara's chest. "Hello, little one," Mara whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Oh, hello." Elias cut the cord with his sharpest knife, boiled clean for this purpose. His hands were steadier now. The immediate crisis passed. He helped deliver the afterbirth, checked that the bleeding wasn't excessive, all the while marveling at the two people who had become the center of his world. "She's perfect," Mara said, examining tiny fingers and toes. "Look, she has your nose." Poor kid, Elias joked weakly, but he was studying the baby's face intently. She could have been anyone's child, the generic features of a newborn, but it didn't matter. She was theirs. "What should we name her?" Mara asked. They discussed names but hadn't settled on anything. Now, looking at their daughter, one seemed right. "Hope," Elias said. "Hope, Martha Hart." "Hope," Mara repeated, smiling through exhaustion. "Yes, that's perfect." By the time Mrs. Patterson arrived that afternoon, slogging through the mud with apologies for the delay, mother and child were cleaned up and resting. The older woman examined both with experienced hands. "You did well," she told Elias. "Both of them healthy as can be. Sometimes babies know when to come, storm or no storm." "She's got her mother's strength," Elias said, watching Mara sleep with hope nestled against her. "And her father's stubbornness, I'll wager." "Mrs. Patterson replied with a knowing look. Word spread quickly through the county. The Hart baby, born in a storm, delivered by her own father. Visitors came when the roads dried, bringing gifts and good wishes. Even some who'd been cool toward them before seemed warmed by the presence of new life. Those first weeks were a blur of feedings and diapers, exhaustion and wonder. Elias found himself captivated by the smallest things Hope's fingers wrapped around his, the way she turned toward Mara's voice, her small sighs of contentment after nursing. "You're besotted," Mara teased one evening, finding him standing over the cradle just watching their daughter sleep. "Completely," he admitted without shame. "Never thought I'd have this again. A family, a future." "Neither did I." She slipped her arm around his waist. "Sometimes I wake up afraid it's all a dream. If it is, I don't want to wake up." Spring bloomed around them, transforming the harsh landscape. Wildflowers carpeted the meadows, the creek ran full with snowmelt, and hope grew, thriving like the season itself. One day in late May, Elias came in from working to find an unexpected visitor. A young man sat at their table, coffee cup in hand, talking earnestly with Mara. Something in her posture tense, uncertain, put Elias on alert. "This is William Fletcher," Mara said as he entered. He's James's cousin, from Philadelphia." The young man stood, extending his hand. He had an earnest face and city-soft hands. "Mr. Hart, I've come a long way to find Mara." "Why?" Elias asked bluntly, not taking the offered hand. William flushed. "When we heard about James's death, the family, well, there were hard words said. Things that shouldn't have been. I've come to make amends." "Bit late for that." "Elias," Mara said softly. "Let him speak." William cleared his throat. "James's father passed last winter. Before he died, he regretted how they'd treated Mara. He left something for her, for the child he knew she was carrying." From his bag, William produced a leather folder. "It's not a fortune, but it's substantial, enough to ensure the child's education. A good start in life." Mara opened the folder with trembling hands. Her eyes widened at the bank draft inside. "I can't accept this," she said, "not after everything." "You can and you should," William insisted. "James would have wanted his child provided for. The family owes you this much at least." "The baby." Mara glanced at Elias, then at Hope sleeping in her cradle. "She's well cared for. She has a father." William followed her gaze. Understanding dawning. "I see. You've remarried." "My wife doesn't need your family's money," Elias said. "We take care of our own." "Our own," William repeated slowly. "You're raising James's child as yours." "Hope is mine," Elias said firmly. "In every way that matters." William studied him for a long moment, then smiled. "James would be grateful. He was my closest friend. You know, we talked about coming west together once." He turned to Mara. "He'd be happy you found someone worthy." The tension in the room eased. William stayed for dinner, sharing stories of James that made Mara laugh and cry in equal measure. He admired Hope, who chose that moment to wake and demand feeding. "She has James's eyes," he said softly. "She has her own eyes," Elias corrected. "Now she's looking for her mother." As Mara nursed the baby, William and Elias stepped outside. The evening was mild, stars just beginning to show. "The money's rightfully hers," William said. "James would want—" "James is gone," Elias interrupted, but not unkindly. "That's my wife and daughter in there. We don't need charity or guilt money." "What about Hope? Shouldn't she have choices, education opportunities?" Elias was quiet for a moment. "Put it in trust then, for when she's grown, but Mara and I will raise her. She'll learn to ride and rope, read and cipher. She'll know she's loved. That's worth more than any bank draft." William nodded slowly. "You're a good man, Mr. Hart. Mara's fortunate." "I'm the fortunate one." They shook hands then. Understanding reached. William left the next morning, but not before setting up a trust for Hope with the local bank, accessible when she turned 18. "You didn't have to do that," Mara said after he'd gone. "Accept the money." "It's not for us. It's for Hope. Her birthright from the Fletchers. When she's old enough, she can decide what to do with it. And if she asks about James, about her real father, then we'll tell her the truth, that she had two fathers, one who gave her life, and one who gave her a home. Both loved her." Mara kissed him then, deeply, gratefully. "How did I get so lucky?" "Luck had nothing to do with it," Elias said. "We fought for this, earned it with blood and tears and stubbornness." Summer arrived in full glory. Hope learned to smile, to laugh, to reach for things. She was a happy baby, easy-tempered, with Mara's sage green eyes and a shock of dark hair that stuck up no matter how Mara tried to smooth it. "She's going to be a handful," Mrs. Patterson predicted during one visit. "I can see it in her eyes. Smart as a whip, this one." "Good," Elias said. "World needs more smart women." The trial of Thomas Gray and his accomplices had concluded in spring. Gray got 5 years for assault and attempted murder. His companions got 2 years each. The Gray family's influence in town waned, their businesses struggling without Thomas's forceful presence. Almost feel sorry for them, Mara said one day, reading the news in the weekly paper. I don't, Elias replied. Man makes his choices. Gray made his. Life settled into new rhythms. Elias worked his land with renewed purpose, building for a future that now seemed bright with promise. Mara tended their home and child, took in more sewing work, and slowly became part of the community that had once shunned her. One evening in late July, as they sat on the porch watching fireflies dance in the dusk, Hope sleeping in Mara's arms, Elias felt a contentment so deep it almost hurt. What are you thinking? Mara asked softly. About how I used to sit here alone, convinced I'd said goodbye to happiness forever, how I'd made peace with emptiness. He reached over, taking her free hand. Then you came along and proved me wrong about everything. We saved each other, she said. That day at the depot, I thought my life was ending. Instead, it was just beginning. 2 new beginnings. Elias agreed, lifting her hand to kiss it. Hope stirred, making small sounds of protest at being held too still. Mara adjusted her position, humming softly. The baby settled again, content. She'll need a brother or sister eventually, Mara said casually. Shouldn't grow up alone. Elias's heart skipped. Is that so? What do you think, ready to do this again? With you, I'm ready for anything. They sat in comfortable silence as night fell properly, the first stars appearing overhead. Inside the cabin, lamplight glowed warm through windows that had once stared dark and empty at the world. This was what Elias had thought lost forever, not just love, but the whole tapestry of family life, the small moments that built into something larger, the shared struggles that became shared strength. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. There was hay to cut, stock to tend, a child to raise. But tonight, surrounded by summer warmth and the quiet breathing of his wife and daughter, Elias' heart was exactly where he belonged. He'd rescued a beaten mail-order bride on a cold winter day, drawn by her quiet courage and desperate dignity. In return, she'd rescued him from a living death of loneliness and regret. Together, they'd built something neither had dared hope for, a love that could weather any storm, a family born not just of blood, but of choice. And this was only the beginning. 5 years had passed since that cold December morning when Elias' heart found a beaten woman at the stage depot. 5 years that had transformed not just their lives, but the very landscape around them. The Hart Ranch had grown, spreading across the valley like hope itself. Where once stood a lonely cabin, now sat a proper house with a wraparound porch and glass windows that caught the morning sun. The barn had been rebuilt, straight and true, and new corrals held a growing herd of horses that were becoming known throughout the territory for their quality. Mama, look! 5-year-old Hope ran across the yard, braids flying, clutching a handful of wildflowers. For the baby. Mara, heavy with their second child, knelt carefully to accept the bouquet. They're beautiful. Sweetheart, should we put them in water for your brother or sister? Sister, Hope declared with certainty. I already got a brother. She was referring to 3-year-old James Jamie. They called him, who was currently helping Elias fix the gate by handing him nails one at a time with a solemn concentration. The boy had his father's steady temperament and his mother's green eyes, a perfect blend of the two people who'd made him in love and commitment. Could be another brother, Mara teased, but Hope shook her head stubbornly. Sister, I asked God specific. Elias looked up from his work, catching Mara's eye with a grin. Their daughter had inherited both their stubborn streaks and then some. She was a force of nature. This child, they'd worried, might come into the world marked by violence and sorrow. Instead, she'd emerged fierce and bright as a new penny, afraid of nothing and no one. Speaking of asking God, Mara said, Reverend Mills expects to see you in Sunday school tomorrow. Young lady, no more hiding in the barn. Sunday school's boring, Hope complained. Rather help Papa with the horses. Education first, horses second. Elias said firmly. That's the rule. It was a conversation they'd had before. Hope had taught herself to read at 4, devouring every book in the house. But formal schooling tried her patience. She'd rather be outdoors, learning the ways of the ranch. "When I grow up, I'm going to train horses like Papa," she announced. "When you grow up, you can be anything you want," Mara corrected gently. "That's why we want you educated, so you have choices." "I choose horses," Hope said simply, then ran off to check on her personal project, a half-wild barn cat she was attempting to tame. Jamie toddled over to his mother, arms raised. "Up, Mama, up!" "Your mama can't be picking you up just now," Elias intercepted, swinging the boy onto his shoulders. "How about a ride with Papa instead?" Jamie squealed with delight, gripping Elias's hair with chubby fists. These were the moments Elias treasured most, the simple, everyday miracles of family life. Each child's laugh, each shared meal, each quiet evening was a gift he'd never thought to receive again. "Letter came while you were in the barn," Mara said, producing an envelope from her apron pocket. "From William Fletcher." James's cousin had become a regular correspondent over the years, sending news from Philadelphia and small gifts for Hope. He'd never forgotten the child of his beloved cousin, though he respected the family they'd built here. Elias read quickly. "He's coming west, got a position with the railroad, wants to visit." That would be nice. Hope should know that part of her history. They'd been honest with Hope about her origins, in age-appropriate ways. She knew Elias wasn't her blood father, that another man had given her life but gone to heaven before she was born. She'd accepted it with the easy adaptability of childhood, secure in the knowledge that Elias was her papa in every way that mattered. "Train's bringing lots of people west," Mara observed. "Town's doubled in size since we married." It was true. Cinder Hollow had grown from a handful of buildings to a proper town with a school, a church, 2 hotels, and multiple businesses. The railroad had brought prosperity, though also complications. "Hank Morrison wants to buy our south pasture again," Elias said. "Offered twice what he did last year. And told him the same thing, not selling. This land is for our children." "Our children," Mara smiled, hand on her belly. "Never thought I'd hear those words. Remember when I could barely imagine surviving to spring. I remember everything about those days. How scared we both were. How careful." "Not scared anymore," she said softly. "Just grateful." A commotion from the barn interrupted the moment. Hope's voice, high and excited, followed by a man's laughter. Not Elias's laugh, someone else. They hurried over to find Samuel from the general store standing in the barn door, grinning wide. "Special delivery," he announced, all the way from Denver. Behind him, a younger man led a beautiful golden Palomino mare, her coat shining like sunrise. Hope stood transfixed, mouth open in wonder. "Happy birthday, little miss." Samuel said, "Few days early, but this beauty couldn't wait." Mine," Hope breathed. "If your parents allow," the younger man said, smiling. "Name's Marcus Wells. I raise horses up Denver way. Mister, Hart wrote asking for something special for a special young lady's 5th birthday." Elias had kept the secret for months, working extra contracts to afford the horse. He'd wanted Hope to have her own mount, not just a pony, but a real horse she could grow with. "Papa," Hope flung herself at his legs. "She's perfect, the most perfect horse ever." "What do you say to Mr. Wells?" Mara prompted. "Thank you, sir. I'll take the best care of her, the very best." "I believe you will," Marcus said. "She's gentle but spirited, like someone else I see." They spent the next hour getting Hope acquainted with her new horse, who she immediately named Sunshine, watching his daughter's joy. Elias felt the familiar tightness in his chest that came from loving so deeply it almost hurt. "You spoil her," Mara said, but she was smiling. "She deserves spoiling. They all do." That evening, as had become their tradition. The whole family gathered on the porch after supper. Hope regaled them with plans for sunshine, while Jamie played with wooden blocks at their feet. The summer air was sweet with the scent of Mara's roses, planted the second year of their marriage and now climbing the porch posts. "Tell the story, Papa," Hope demanded. "About finding Mama." It was her favorite story, requested often. Elias had learned to edit it carefully, focusing on the rescue and romance while glossing over the darker parts. "Well now, it was the coldest December I can remember," he began, settling into the familiar rhythm. Snow coming down like heaven was shaking out its feather beds. As he spoke, painting pictures of that fateful day, Mara reached over and took his hand. Her wedding ring caught the last light of sunset, not Martha's ring anymore, but a new one Elias had bought her on their first anniversary, wanting her to have something that was only theirs. "And then what, Papa?" Hope prompted when he paused. "Then your mama made the best biscuits I'd ever tasted, and I knew I was in trouble." "Elias," Mara laughed, swatting at him. "That's not how it goes." "Sure it is. Man's stomach knows what his head's too stubborn to admit." Hope giggled. "Mama's biscuits are the best." "Everything your mama makes is the best," Elias agreed. "That's why I had to marry her quick, before someone else figured it out." "Smart man," Hope declared. Getting smarter every day. As darkness fell, they carried the children inside for baths and bedtime. Hope insisted on checking on Sunshine one more time, pressing her face to the window to see the barn where her new horse was stabled. "She'll be there in the morning," Mara assured her. "Horses don't disappear overnight." "Just checking," Hope said. "Sometimes good things go away." "Not the real good things," Elias said, tucking her in. "The real good things, the important ones, they stay." Later, after the children were asleep, Elias and Mara sat by their bedroom window, watching stars emerge in the clear Wyoming sky. "Thomas Gray gets out of prison next month," Mara said quietly. "I know. Are you worried?" "No." Elias pulled her closer. "Man's got nothing left here. His family's moved on, business sold. Besides, he'd be a fool to come near us again." 5 years changes a person," Mara mused. "Look how much we've changed." It was true. The frightened woman at the depot and the bitter widower were barely recognizable in the confident mother and successful rancher they'd become. Time and love had transformed them both. "No regrets?" he asked. "Their old ritual?" "Only one," she said, and his heart skipped until she continued. "I wish we'd met sooner. Wish we'd had more years." "We've got years ahead still. Decades. Long enough to see Hope married, Jamie grown, this new one born and raised." "This new one and maybe one more after," she suggested with a sly smile. "Woman, you're going to fill up this house." "That's the idea. Empty houses are too sad. Full ones are just right." A sound from the children's room sent Mara to check. She returned, smiling. "Jamie's talking in his sleep. Something about nails and hammers. You've got him convinced he's a carpenter. Good honest work, though I suspect he'll be more bookish, like his mama. While Hope takes after her papa, wild and free." "She's got your courage," Elias corrected. "Never seen anyone braver than you, facing down everything you have." They prepared for bed, moving through the comfortable routines of long marriage. But as Mara blew out the lamp, she paused. "Do you ever think about that day, really think about it, if you'd ridden past? If I'd taken the stage back east, if any single thing had been different?" "Try not to," Elias admitted. "Scares me too much, thinking how close I came to missing this." "Me too." She found him in the darkness, her lips soft against his. "Thank you for stopping, for seeing me, for everything." "Thank you for being brave enough to trust a grumpy stranger." They settled into sleep, curved together like two parts of a whole. Outside, an owl called across the valley, and the horses shifted in their stalls. Sunshine whinnied softly. perhaps dreaming of tomorrow's adventures with her new young mistress. In the children's room, Hope had kicked off her covers as usual, while Jamie slept clutching the toy horse Elias had carved for him. Soon there would be another child in the nursery, another voice added to the cheerful chaos of their home. The house that had once echoed with emptiness now hummed with life. Every room held memories' first steps, first words, birthday celebrations, quiet moments of connection. The walls themselves seemed to pulse with contentment, sheltering the family that had been built from the ashes of two broken hearts. As sleep took him, Elias thought about the morning 5 years hence, when he'd have 3 children at his breakfast table. Maybe 4. Hope would be 10, old enough to help with real ranch work. Jamie would be starting school. The baby Mara carried would be running around, adding to the blessed disorder. And Mara would be there, silver just starting to thread through her brown hair, laugh lines deepening around her sage-green eyes. Still making the best biscuits in Wyoming territory. They'd weather whatever came: droughts, hard winters, market changes, because they'd weathered worse and emerged stronger. A cowboy had rescued his neighbor's beaten mail-order bride and fallen hard for her kind heart. But in the end, they'd rescued each other, building from the ruins of their separate sorrows, something neither had dared dream of: a love that could encompass past griefs while reaching toward future joys. A family bound not by blood alone, but by choice and commitment, and the daily decision to keep faith with one another. It was, Elias reflected in that drowsy space between waking and sleep, one hell of a love story, the kind worth living, the kind worth telling. And they were still writing it, one day at a time, one season at a time, one precious moment at a time. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new blessings. But tonight, in their house on the Wyoming prairie, all was well. The ghosts were at peace, the future was bright, and love, real, tested. Unshakable love stood guard against whatever darkness might try to intrude. In the barn, Sunshine dozed on her feet, dreaming perhaps of the little girl who'd claimed her heart at first sight. Soon enough, they'd be racing across the meadows together, wind in their faces, freedom in their hearts. But for now, all was quiet on the Hart Ranch. Just another night in paradise, hard-won and deeply cherished. Just another chapter in a story that had begun with desperation and bloomed into something beautiful. The beginning disguised as an ending, the rescue that became a resurrection, the kind heart that had saved them all. Thank you so much for listening to this story of love, redemption, and second chances in the Old West. I hope Elias and Mara's journey touched your heart as much as it touched mine while sharing it. Where are you listening from? Please comment below and let me know your thoughts on their story. I'd love to hear what moments resonated with you. If you enjoyed this tale, please subscribe to Wild West Night for more authentic frontier love stories. Give this video a like. And don't forget to hit that hype button to help more people discover these heartwarming stories from America's past. Until next time, partners.